Have you ever noticed how exhausted you feel after explaining yourself to people who were never meant to understand you in the first place? You explain your decisions, your dreams, your changes, your silence, and still someone questions you. Still someone misunderstands you. Still someone turns your truth into doubt. But here's the reality most people never learn. Your life becomes peaceful the moment you stop performing for the world and start living for yourself. Because the more you explain, the more you shrink, the more you justify, the more you hand your power to others. And the more you seek validation, the more you disconnect from your own truth. Let me ask you something. How much of your life would change if you stopped needing people to agree with you? Today, I'm going to show you why your real life, your calm life, your powerful life, finally begins when you stop explaining yourself and start trusting the quiet wisdom within you. 1. When you stop explaining, you stop overthinking. Overthinking is not something that suddenly appears without reason. It is a reaction. It begins the moment your mind tries to manage, predict, or control how the world will receive your choices. When you constantly explain yourself, you train your mind to believe that every decision must be approved, accepted, or understood by someone else. This creates a mental habit where you start imagining conversations that never happened, replaying situations that are already over, and worrying about people who are not even thinking about you. Your mind becomes loud because it is trying to calculate reactions, avoid judgment, and protect you from rejection. This is why even small decisions start to feel heavy. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment, and one of the strongest attachments in modern life is the need to be understood and accepted by everyone. You become attached to people's opinions, attached to their approval, attached to their reactions. Instead of living for yourself, you begin living inside an imaginary audience that sits in your mind all day. This attachment creates endless mental noise. What will they think? Will they misunderstand me? Will they judge me? Should I explain more? And suddenly, the simplest decision, like taking a break, changing your routine, starting a new dream, or walking away from something unhealthy, becomes a complicated mental battle. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you cut this attachment. It is like removing a heavy backpack you didn't even realize you were carrying. Your mind begins to breathe again because it no longer has to manage the invisible expectations of the world. The noise slows down, the worry softens, the pressure dissolves. You return to your natural state, a state of peace, clarity, and inner stillness. You no longer perform for others. You simply live your life as it is meant to be lived. When you stop explaining yourself, something powerful happens. Your thoughts become lighter and your emotions become calmer. Your mind shifts from fear to clarity, from doubt to confidence. Instead of rehearsing imaginary conversations, you begin focusing on what truly matters: your path, your growth, your peace. You suddenly walk through life with a quiet confidence that doesn't need to be announced or explained. You stop living as a prisoner of other people's opinions and start living as the master of your own journey. This is the moment your real life begins, not when people understand you, but when you no longer need them to. 2. Explaining yourself weakens your spiritual energy. Every human being carries a certain amount of inner energy, a quiet spiritual force that fuels your ideas, your confidence, your decisions, and the direction of your life. This energy is strongest when it is kept within you, protected and nurtured like a small flame. But when you constantly explain yourself, you allow this flame to leak out little by little. You may not notice it immediately, but every explanation, every justification, every attempt to convince someone drains a part of the power you need to grow, evolve, and move forward in life. Think about what happens when you share your plans or dreams too early. You might tell someone about a goal that excites you, a project you want to start, a habit you want to build, or a change you want to make. The moment you explain it, you unconsciously begin to wait for their reaction. If they support you, you feel motivated. If they doubt you, question you, or don't understand you, your excitement suddenly decreases. The flame inside you shakes. You start thinking twice. You begin to wonder if you're wrong, if you're dreaming too big, or if you are capable at all. This is how explaining yourself weakens your spiritual energy, not because explaining is harmful, but because people can unintentionally take away the strength that was supposed to push you forward. Buddhism teaches a simple truth. Your inner flame must be protected from the winds of external noise. Not everyone can understand your vision, and they are not supposed to. People can only see life from their own lens, their fears, their limitations, their experiences. Many people will speak from their smallness, not from your greatness. Their doubts are a reflection of their world, not yours. But when you explain yourself to them, you invite their world into your mind. You let their energy mix with yours, and slowly, without realizing it, your clear vision becomes blurry, your confidence becomes shaky, and your motivation becomes dependent on their approval. Another subtle way your energy weakens is through unnecessary justification. When you feel the need to explain why you chose peace over drama, why you walked away from something toxic, why you chose solitude over noise, or why you changed your priorities, you are already giving away your power. You are telling your mind that your decisions require permission, that your choices are not enough unless someone else validates them. This weakens your spiritual core. It teaches your mind to second-guess itself. It creates a habit where you trust the outside world more than your own intuition, and nothing disconnects you from your spiritual path faster than losing trust in yourself. When you stop explaining yourself, you reclaim that lost energy. You stop forcing others to understand what was never their journey. You begin to protect your ideas like seeds planted in rich soil, quiet, hidden, but growing with strength. You begin to walk with a calm inner power that no one can shake because it comes from within, not from reactions around you. Your decisions become cleaner, your actions become bolder, your mind becomes sharper, and your heart becomes more aligned with your purpose. Protect your energy by staying silent when silence is wiser than explanation. Protect your dreams by letting them grow in peace instead of exposing them too early. Protect your spirit by trusting yourself more deeply than anyone else, because the truth is simple. The less you explain, the stronger you become. 3. Most people judge from their level of awareness, not yours. One of the most liberating truths you will ever learn is that people do not judge you based on who you truly are. They judge you based on the limits of their own awareness. Every human being sees life through a personal filter created by their fears, experiences, insecurities, beliefs, and emotional wounds. This means no matter how clearly you explain yourself, people will only understand you from the level of consciousness they live in. And that level is different for everyone. Imagine two people watching the same sunrise. One sees hope, one sees nothing special. The sunrise didn't change, their awareness did. In the same way, two people can look at your dream, your decision, or your lifestyle and have completely different reactions. One might see courage, another might see foolishness. One might see growth, another might see trouble. One might be inspired, another might be threatened. None of these reactions truly describe you, they only reveal the observer. This is why explaining yourself becomes pointless. When someone lacks courage, they cannot understand your bravery. When someone has a fearful mindset, they cannot understand your willingness to take risks. When someone has lived their whole life seeking approval, they cannot understand your desire for independence. When someone is attached to comfort, your decision to grow will confuse them. When someone has never healed their own pain, your peace will bother them. Their reaction is a reflection of where they are, not where you are. Buddhism teaches that every mind has a different level of awakening. Some minds are still asleep, trapped in old patterns and controlled by ego. Some minds are partially awake, aware enough to see but not strong enough to act. Some minds are fully awake, able to understand life with wisdom and compassion. You cannot force someone whose mind is asleep to understand the clarity that awakened inside you. It is like trying to explain the beauty of the ocean to someone who has never left their village. They will only understand from their limited experience, and anything beyond that will sound impossible. Think about how often you have tried to justify your decisions to people who were never capable of understanding them. You explain why you need peace. They think you are avoiding responsibility. You explain why you walked away from someone harmful. They think you are being dramatic. You explain why you want to start something new. They think you are wasting your time. You explain why you stopped talking to certain people. They think you have changed for the worse. You explain why you want to grow. They think you are trying to be better than others. But in reality, nothing is wrong with your path. Their awareness is simply too limited to see it. When you recognize this truth, a deep sense of freedom enters your life. You stop expecting understanding from everyone. You stop reacting to unnecessary opinions. You stop carrying the weight of proving yourself. You stop shrinking your dreams to fit inside someone else's small mind. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never capable of receiving your truth. And something powerful begins to happen. You start aligning your life with people whose awareness matches your direction. You naturally attract those who understand without explanation, support without conditions, and respect without questioning your every move. These are the people who see you clearly because they are also working on themselves. Their minds are open, their hearts are free, their awareness is expanding. They do not judge your journey, they honor it. Understanding this truth saves you from unnecessary suffering. It reminds you that your path does not need approval to be valid. Your growth does not need applause to be real. Your transformation does not need witnesses to be powerful. When you realize that people judge from their own awareness, you stop wasting time trying to convince them, and you start using your energy to become even more aligned with your own purpose. This is how you free yourself from judgment, not by changing who you are, but by understanding who people are. 4. Silence protects your growth from negative energy. Silence is not emptiness. In Buddhism, silence is a form of spiritual protection, a shield that guards your energy, your growth, and your inner transformation from forces that could weaken or delay it. Many people think silence means hiding or being secretive, but in reality, Silence is wisdom. It is the understanding that not every thought deserves to be spoken, not every plan deserves to be shared, and not every stage of your journey deserves an audience. The moment you begin to grow, you attract both light and shadow. Some people will quietly support you, while others will project their insecurities onto you. Some will celebrate your progress, while others will question it. Some will encourage your transformation, while others will feel threatened by it. This is not because your growth is wrong, it is because your growth forces others to confront the parts of themselves they have avoided for years. When you speak too soon or explain too much, you invite all of these energies into your life, whether you wanted them or not. When you keep your growth silent, you protect it from interference. Think of your progress like a young seed. In its early stages, it is delicate and needs protection, warmth, and quietness. If you expose it too early to harsh opinions, to judgment, to doubt, to gossip, it can be damaged before it ever has the chance to develop strong roots. Your dreams, goals, and personal changes work the same way. Silence allows your intentions to grow strong on the inside before the world has the chance to influence them. Negative energy does not always come from openly harmful people. Sometimes it comes from the exhaustion of explaining yourself. Sometimes from the confusion created by others' opinions. Sometimes from people who love you but don't understand you. Sometimes from people who pretend to care but secretly enjoy your setbacks. The more you explain your life, the more you expose it to these energies. And slowly, negativity sneaks into your mind, not because you are weak, but because the human heart absorbs emotions from its surroundings. Silence becomes a powerful filter. It prevents unnecessary voices from entering your mental space. It stops you from absorbing fears that do not belong to you. It keeps you focused on what truly matters. When you choose silence, you choose clarity. You choose your path over distractions. You choose your peace over chaos. You choose your inner truth over the noise of the world. Another reason silence is so powerful is because it allows your actions to become louder than your explanations. When you quietly work on yourself, improving your habits, building your discipline, sharpening your mind, healing your heart, people eventually see the results without you having to justify a single thing. There is a special strength in allowing your growth to speak for itself. Buddhist philosophy teaches that true transformation is not something you announce, it is something you embody. And the world recognizes genuine change without any explanation. Silence also protects your emotional balance. When you are silent, you avoid arguments that drain your peace. You avoid unnecessary debates. You avoid people who demand explanations but offer no understanding. You avoid overthinking because your mind is not busy trying to manage everyone else's expectations. You stay centered within yourself. You stay aligned with your purpose. You stay focused on your evolution. Most importantly, silence helps you build a life that belongs to you, not to the crowd, not to opinions, not to society. A quiet life does not mean a small life, it means a strong one. When you grow in silence, you are not influenced by noise. When you improve quietly, no one can sabotage your progress. When you move without announcing, people cannot interfere with what they do not know. Silence is your sanctuary. It is the space where your spirit evolves without judgment, where your ideas mature without interruption, and where your transformation becomes undeniable. Protect your growth with silence, because not every soul deserves access to your becoming. 5. You don't need validation to be worthy. One of the most silent forms of suffering in modern life is the constant need for validation, the invisible pressure to feel accepted, valued, and approved by others. Many people never realize how deeply this need controls their decisions, their emotions, and even their self-worth. From childhood, we are conditioned to believe that our value comes from outside ourselves: approval from parents, praise from teachers, likes from friends, attention from society. Slowly, without noticing, we begin to measure our worth through the reactions of others. And the moment you do this, you hand your peace, your happiness, and your identity to the world. Buddhism teaches that true freedom begins when you understand that your worth is not something that can be given or taken. It is something that already exists within you. Your value is not a reward. It is not a trophy. It is not something you must earn by explaining yourself, proving yourself, or pleasing others. Your worth is inherent. It comes from your existence, your consciousness, and your inner nature. But when you constantly explain yourself, you unintentionally create the belief that your decisions are not good enough unless someone else approves them. You make your confidence dependent on external opinions, and nothing weakens the human spirit faster than outsourcing your self-worth to the world. Every time you say, "Let me explain," you are subconsciously saying, "Please don't misunderstand me. Please don't judge me. Please accept me." Even if your words are strong, the energy behind them is seeking permission. And seeking permission is the opposite of inner freedom. It keeps you small. It keeps you hesitant. It keeps you afraid of being disliked. It keeps you living a life designed for others, not for yourself. When you look closely at the people whose opinions you seek, you often realize something important. They are not any wiser, more evolved, or more peaceful than you are. Many of them are also confused. Many are insecure. Many are afraid. Many are controlled by their own validation-seeking habits. When you depend on such minds for approval, you create a fragile identity that collapses with every small criticism and rises only with temporary praise. This is why people who rely on validation experience emotional highs and lows, because their self-worth is unstable. The more you seek validation, the more disconnected you become from your own intuition. Instead of asking, "Does this feel right for me?" you start asking, "What will others think?" You make decisions based on fear rather than growth. You avoid risks because you don't want to be judged. You suppress your true personality so others remain comfortable. You hold back your dreams because you don't want to look foolish. You shrink yourself to fit into a version of you that others find acceptable. This is not living, this is performing. When you stop seeking validation, something extraordinary happens. You begin to return to yourself. You start trusting your inner voice more than the noise around you. You begin to realize that your decisions do not need to be understood to be meaningful. You understand that your path does not require applause to be valuable. You stop explaining, justifying, and defending your choices. And with every moment of silence, your self-worth strengthens. Buddhism teaches that the strongest person is the one who is anchored within themselves. When you recognize your intrinsic worth, people's opinions lose their power over you. Criticism no longer crushes you. Rejection no longer scares you. Judgment no longer disturbs your peace. You stop being emotionally controlled by the world because your value is no longer negotiable. It is no longer something you seek, it is something you own. You begin to speak less and do more. You stop convincing and start living. You stop apologizing for being yourself. You stop stretching your identity to please others. You stop dimming your light so others don't feel uncomfortable. You no longer chase approval. Instead, you respect yourself enough to stand alone when needed. And with this shift, you become mentally stronger, emotionally grounded, and spiritually unshakable. People may misunderstand you. They may judge you. They may talk about you. They may question your decisions. But none of these things can affect you once you truly understand that their approval is optional and your worth is permanent. Your life becomes peaceful the moment you stop seeking permission to be yourself. Leo, the right people don't need explanations. One of the biggest sources of emotional exhaustion in life comes from trying to explain yourself to people who were never meant to understand you in the first place. You bend your words. You soften your truth. You adjust your decisions. You try to justify why you chose peace, why you walked away, why you changed, why you grew, why you didn't react, or why you finally put yourself first. But the more you explain, the more you realize something important. The people who genuinely belong in your life never needed those explanations to begin with. Buddhism teaches that alignment is natural. When someone is aligned with your values, your growth, your heart, and your direction, they understand you without needing a full story. They can read your silence. They can feel your intentions. They can sense your truth. They don't demand justifications because they trust your judgment. They don't push you to defend yourself because they see your sincerity. They don't question your decisions because they respect your path, even if it is different from their own. The people who truly belong in your life meet you where your soul stands, not where your words reach. Their acceptance is not conditional. Their support is not dependent on whether your choices benefit them. Their care is not based on how convenient you are. When you are around such people, you feel understood without speaking, seen without explaining, and supported without performing. This is because their level of awareness matches yours. Your emotional frequency aligns with theirs. Nothing needs to be forced. On the other hand, people who are not aligned with your growth will always demand explanations. They expect you to justify why you don't want drama anymore. They want reasons for why you don't tolerate negativity. They feel entitled to know why you changed your routine, why you stopped responding, why you became quieter, why you walked away from certain people, or why you set new boundaries. But what they are really asking for is control, not understanding. They want access to your decisions so they can influence them, judge them, or resist them. When someone does not understand your silence, they will not understand your words either. You can explain yourself 100 times, break everything down, repeat your reasons, soften your truth, and still end up feeling misunderstood. Not because you explained poorly, but because their awareness is not ready to understand your evolution. Their minds cannot grasp the growth that is happening inside you, and so they respond with confusion, defensiveness, or resistance. And every time you try harder to explain, you drain yourself. You lose energy. You start doubting yourself. Eventually, you realize that you are explaining to be understood by someone who has already decided not to understand. The right people will never make you feel that way. They create space for your growth. They respect your boundaries without needing a full lecture. They accept the new version of you without clinging to the old one. They do not take your silence personally because they know you are finding your balance. They do not panic when you distance yourself because they trust your process. They do not chase explanations because they care more about your peace than about their own comfort. When you stop explaining yourself, something powerful happens. People naturally filter out of your life. Those who were only connected to the old version of you slowly fade away. Those who were attached to your past identity lose interest because you no longer feed their expectations. Those who wanted the easy, predictable version of you will complain, criticize, or distance themselves. But this is not a loss, it is alignment. It is your soul shedding relationships that cannot grow with you. And in that space, the right people appear. The people who understand your silence, your boundaries, your growth, your healing journey, your transformation. The people who feel your intentions even when you don't speak them. The people who stay without needing explanations, who listen without judgment, and who support without jealousy. The people who stand with you, not because you explain well, but because they care deeply. When you embrace this truth, your emotional world becomes lighter. You stop begging to be understood. You stop forcing clarity where it does not belong. You stop giving long speeches to people with closed minds. You stop apologizing for choosing yourself. You stop chasing people who keep making you repeat your truth. The people meant for you will understand your heart even in your silence. And the people not meant for you will misunderstand even your clearest words. When you truly accept this, you stop explaining, and that is when your relationships become peaceful, real, and aligned with your highest self. 7. You become the master of your life, not the audience. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must make a choice. Continue living for the world, or finally start living for themselves. Most people spend years, sometimes their entire lives, living inside an invisible prison created by opinions, expectations, and explanations. They adjust their decisions based on who might get offended. They hide their dreams because someone might laugh. They walk on eggshells because they fear judgment. They shrink their personality so they don't appear too much. They wait for permission before taking steps they already know are necessary. They are alive, but not living. They are breathing, but not free. They are moving, but not progressing. And the root of all this suffering is simple: the need to explain and justify everything. When you explain yourself to everyone, you unknowingly place yourself in the position of a performer. You become the actor on a stage, constantly scanning the audience for approval, adjusting your script, changing your tone, softening your truth, and shifting your choices to avoid disappointing anyone. You lose your power because your life stops belonging to you. It belongs to the reactions of others. Every explanation you give is like handing another piece of your life to the world. Every justification you offer is like signing over another part of your freedom. And every time you silence your inner voice so the world can feel comfortable, you step further away from the person you were meant to become. Buddhism teaches that true liberation comes only when you stop identifying yourself with external labels, opinions, and attachments. When you constantly explain yourself, you reinforce these attachments. You allow the world to decide whether you are right or wrong, worthy or unworthy, strong or weak. But when you finally stop explaining, you reclaim the sacred control you were meant to have over your own journey. You shift from being the audience of your own life to becoming the conscious master of it. This shift is both subtle and life-changing. You begin to notice that your mind becomes clearer when you no longer worry about who will approve or disapprove. Decisions that once felt heavy suddenly feel light. You start acting instead of overthinking. You begin trusting your intuition rather than replaying imaginary conversations in your head. You step into experiences not because others support them, but because they feel right to you. You let go of the need to justify your every move and instead anchor yourself in quiet confidence. This is the moment your internal power begins to awaken. When you become the master of your life, your identity no longer depends on praise or criticism. You stop being shaken by compliments or destroyed by disapproval, because both become irrelevant to your direction. You understand that the world will always have something to say no matter what you do. If you stay silent, they will call you weak. If you speak up, they will call you arrogant. If you work hard, they will say you are obsessed. If you relax, they will say you are lazy. No explanation can ever satisfy people who have already decided how they want to see you. And once you understand this, you stop offering explanations altogether. One of the most powerful transformations that happens when you stop explaining yourself is that your inner voice becomes louder than the noise around you. You begin to access a deeper level of clarity. You notice what you truly want, not what others want for you. You recognize what is draining your energy and what is nourishing your spirit. You sense which relationships elevate you and which ones keep you stuck. You begin to see your path with such honesty and sharpness that you wonder how you ever relied on external opinions before. This is not arrogance, this is awakening. You also become more decisive. When you stop justifying your choices, you remove the hesitation that comes from fearing how others will perceive them. You take bold steps you once avoided. You make changes you once postponed. You walk away from what is unhealthy without needing to explain why. You move toward what inspires you without seeking validation. You outgrow people without feeling guilty. You shift your life in ways that align with your peace, even if others do not understand it. Your life becomes cleaner, lighter, and more aligned, simply because you are no longer trying to convince the world. Interestingly, when you stop explaining yourself, your respect for yourself grows. Your self-esteem strengthens. Your boundaries become firm. You stop apologizing for your growth. You stop trying to make everyone comfortable. You stop lowering your standards just to avoid explaining them. You realize that anyone who demands long explanations simply to respect you is not someone whose respect should matter. You begin to attract people who understand your energy without needing a full story. People who value your presence without demanding reasons. People who trust you without interrogating your decisions. These people contribute to your peace instead of disturbing it. Another profound shift occurs. You stop blaming others for your life. When you take full ownership of your path, you recognize that your circumstances, your habits, your progress, and your peace are in your hands. You stop waiting for external changes. You stop expecting others to fix your life. You take responsibility in a way that is empowering rather than burdensome. This is when real growth begins, not the kind of growth that looks impressive on the outside, but the kind that transforms you from the inside. Buddhist wisdom also teaches that the greatest suffering comes from resisting what is. When you explain yourself, you resist who you are. You resist your truth, your nature, your desires, your intuition, your evolution. But when you stop explaining, you surrender to the truth of your being. You allow life to unfold without the need to justify every chapter. You shift from controlling life to flowing with it. And in that flow, you discover your authentic power, the power that comes from inner stillness, not external noise. Stopping the habit of explaining yourself does not mean becoming cold, harsh, or disconnected. It means becoming grounded, self-assured, and inner-directed. It means you value your peace more than people's opinions. It means you understand that your life story is not a public debate. It means your journey is between you and your inner wisdom, not between you and the expectations of the world. Once you taste this freedom, you never go back. You no longer need the world to understand your silence. You no longer need approval to move forward. You no longer fear judgment because you have accepted yourself so fully that external opinions cannot shake you. You become anchored within your own being. You become the master of your path, the leader of your soul, the quiet creator of your destiny. And the beautiful irony is this: once you stop explaining yourself, your life begins to speak for you. People will see your transformation. They will witness your growth. They will notice your peace. They will observe your strength. They will feel your presence. And they will realize, without you ever needing to explain, that you built a life guided not by fear, but by clarity, discipline, self-respect, and spiritual alignment. When you stop explaining yourself, you step into the most powerful chapter of your life, the chapter where you write your story without asking for permission, the chapter where you walk your path without looking back, the chapter where your mind becomes peaceful, your choices become intentional, and your life finally becomes yours. This is what it means to become the master of your life, not by controlling the world, but by reclaiming control of yourself. And once you reach this level of inner freedom, nothing and no one can take it away from you. 8. Silence turns your mind into a powerful weapon, not a weak prison. There is a profound transformation that occurs when a person learns to be silent, not silent because they are afraid to speak, not silent because they are uncertain, not silent because someone forced them into quietness, but silent because they have finally discovered the strength, clarity, and inner power that only silence can create. Most people assume silence is passive or weak, but in Buddhist wisdom, silence is one of the strongest tools a human being can master. It sharpens your mind, it deepens your awareness, and it transforms your inner world from a place of noise into a place of mastery. When you stop explaining yourself, you give silence the opportunity to shape you into someone who moves differently, thinks differently, and rises differently. From the moment we are children, we are conditioned to fill every gap with words. We explain our mistakes, defend our decisions, justify our emotions, and overtalk our fears. We grow into adults who cannot sit with our own thoughts without feeling uncomfortable. The mind becomes like a loud room with no windows, constantly talking, reacting, and seeking approval. And because the mind is so loud, we start believing that clarity comes from more talking, more explaining, more discussing, more arguing, more convincing. But the truth is the opposite. The more you talk, the more your mind loses its sharpness. The more you explain, the more your energy scatters. The more you defend your choices, the more you weaken your confidence. Silence is what gathers your thoughts, centers your emotions, and strengthens your intuition. Silence is where clarity is born. When you stop explaining yourself, you learn to listen to your inner voice, to the subtle signals of your intuition, to the quiet truths you had been ignoring. Your mind, which was once chaotic, begins to settle. The unnecessary noise fades. The fake internal conversations disappear. The anxiety about how people perceive you loses its power. You start hearing the truth underneath the noise, the truth of who you are, what you need, what you want, and what direction your life is asking you to take. This truth only reveals itself when the mind becomes still, and stillness is impossible when you are constantly justifying yourself to others. Silence teaches you something else. Most of the world does not deserve access to your inner thoughts. Not everyone should know what you feel, what you desire, what you fear, what you're building, or what you're healing from. People misuse your vulnerability when they do not understand it. They project their fears onto your dreams. They see your doubts and magnify them. They judge your intentions through the lens of their own limitations. When you explain yourself to the wrong person, you give them the power to distort your reality. But when you choose silence, you protect your inner world from contamination. You keep your mind clean. You keep your heart steady. You keep your spirit aligned. In silence, your decisions become more precise because they are no longer influenced by noise. You start observing rather than reacting. You notice patterns you were blind to before, the patterns in your behavior, the patterns in your environment, the patterns in people's energy. You see who truly supports you and who only pretends. You see who is draining your spirit and who is adding peace to it. You understand what is harming your growth and what is helping it. Silence heightens your awareness to a level where you no longer need explanations. You simply see things as they are. One of the greatest benefits of silence is emotional control. When you speak too quickly, you speak from emotion. When you stay silent, you respond from wisdom. Silence gives your mind the time it needs to process, to observe, to understand, and to choose the best response, not the fastest one. In Buddhism, this is known as mastering the gap between stimulus and reaction. Most people react instantly because they do not have the inner discipline to hold silence. They react from anger, insecurity, fear, or ego. This reaction often creates problems, arguments, and regret. But when you hold silence, you create space between the moment something happens and the moment you respond. In that space, clarity enters, wisdom enters. You gain the ability to choose responses that elevate your life rather than complicate it. Silence also teaches humility, and not the weak kind, but the powerful kind. The kind of humility that comes from having nothing to prove. When you no longer explain yourself, people sense a quiet confidence in you. They feel your presence more intensely because you are not wasting your energy on unnecessary words. You start carrying an aura of calm authority. People take your silence seriously because it shows discipline. It shows emotional maturity. It shows that you are not desperate to be understood, not eager to be liked, not interested in superficial validation. This kind of silence earns respect without you asking for it. People start looking at you differently, more carefully, more attentively, because silence forces them to pay attention to your actions, not your explanations. Silence also protects your ambition. When you speak too much about your dreams, your mind gets tricked into feeling as if you've already achieved something. Talking gives you false satisfaction. Explaining your goals gives you a sense of accomplishment, but without any actual action. This is why many people talk a lot but achieve little. Their energy stays in their words instead of moving into their actions. But when you stay silent about your plans, your energy stays concentrated. You build momentum. You protect your dreams from doubt, from jealousy, from interference. You grow quietly, consistently, and powerfully. And when your results finally appear, people are shocked not because you explained the journey, but because you mastered it in silence. Silence transforms your relationships too. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop attracting people who depend on explanations in order to treat you correctly. Instead, you attract people who respect your boundaries without needing long speeches. You attract people who understand your energy rather than demanding your reasoning. You attract people who value your presence rather than oversharing your private world. Your relationships become healthier because they are built on respect, not interrogation. They become lighter because they no longer require emotional labor to maintain. They become peaceful because silence removes the need for constant justification. And then there comes a deeper level of silence, the silence within yourself, where you stop arguing with your own thoughts. You stop explaining your choices even to yourself. You stop trying to convince your own mind of your decisions. This inner silence is freedom. It is the moment your heart and mind work together instead of fighting each other. It is the moment your spirit stops seeking external permission and starts trusting its own path. True silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of self-mastery. It is the moment you no longer need the world to agree with you. It is the moment you no longer betray your inner voice. It is the moment you no longer fear judgment. It is the moment your mind becomes your ally instead of your enemy. When you reach this state, you stop living like an audience member in your own life. Instead, you step into the role you were meant to play, the creator, the leader, the master of your journey. Silence makes you untouchable, not because you become cold or distant, but because you become centered, grounded, and unshakable. You no longer chase approval. You no longer defend every decision. You no longer fear misunderstandings. You no longer give access to people who do not deserve it. You move through life with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are and where you are going. And that your silence becomes your strongest form of power. 9. Living without explaining yourself unlocks a level of freedom most people never experience. There is a kind of freedom in life that very few people ever taste, a freedom so deep, so clean, and so powerful that once you experience it, you never return to the old way of living. It is the freedom that comes when you no longer feel responsible for managing other people's perceptions of you. When you stop trying to shape their opinions, when you no longer adjust your voice, your decisions, your dreams, or your personality to make others comfortable. When you finally drop the instinct to explain each thought, each move, each boundary, each change. This kind of freedom does not show up in noise, it shows up in silence. It arrives the moment you detach from the emotional burden of wanting to be understood all the time, by everyone, in every situation. Most people spend their lives imprisoned by the idea that they must constantly explain who they are. They explain why they are different. They explain why they walked away from certain people. They explain why they changed their priorities. They explain why they suddenly want peace instead of chaos. They explain why they no longer tolerate disrespect, inconsistency, or emotional manipulation. They explain why they need space, why they cut off certain relationships, why their dreams feel unrealistic to others, why they refuse to settle for less than what they deserve. They live in an endless cycle of explanation, apology, and justification, believing it will make life easier. But in reality, it only makes life heavier. The more you explain, the more people feel entitled to question you. The more you defend yourself, the more people think they have the right to judge you. The more you justify your decisions, the more you convince your own mind that you cannot trust yourself unless the world approves. And without realizing it, you place chains on your own freedom. You become a prisoner inside a cage, built by your own desire to be understood. Buddhism teaches that true liberation begins the moment you detach from what others think of you, not because their thoughts are irrelevant, but because your inner peace is too precious to be handed over to every passing opinion. When you stop explaining yourself, you reclaim ownership of your mind. You stop letting your mental space be shaped by the reactions, fears, expectations, or misunderstandings of others. You start living from a place of inner alignment instead of external pressure. Your choices finally become your own. One of the most powerful things that happens when you stop explaining yourself is that you begin to trust yourself more deeply. You strengthen your intuition. You learn to listen to your inner guidance without needing anyone to confirm or approve it. You begin making decisions with clarity, not confusion. You walk your path with confidence instead of hesitation. And slowly, you start to realize that you are actually far more capable than you ever gave yourself credit for. You do not need someone's permission to evolve. You do not need a supporter to walk away from something that is damaging your peace. You do not need a cheerleader to chase your dream. You do not need the world to understand your healing journey. You only need courage, the courage to stand by your truth, even when no one else sees it. You also become emotionally untouchable in a way that surprises even you. When you no longer rely on explanation, people's opinions lose their emotional weight. Their misunderstanding does not disturb your peace. Their doubts no longer slow you down. Their criticism no longer sinks into your heart. Their gossip no longer affects your self-worth. Their judgment no longer shapes your identity. You begin to see clearly that most people are not judging you because of you. They judge you because of what is unresolved within themselves. They project their insecurities. They respond from their wounds. They react based on their level of awareness. Their perspective has nothing to do with your truth. When you live without explaining yourself, something else becomes incredibly clear. You stop giving access to people who cannot handle your evolution. You naturally detach from energy that feels heavy, restrictive, or draining. You stop forcing connections. You stop chasing anyone. You stop over-communicating just to keep peace. You stop over-apologizing for existing in a way that feels right to you. Your boundaries become stronger because you no longer feel the need to justify them. You finally understand that not every person deserves a place in your inner world, and the moment you stop explaining yourself, the wrong ones leave and the right ones stay. You also become more focused than you have ever been. Explanations take energy, mental energy, emotional energy, spiritual energy. When you remove the habit of explaining, you reclaim all that energy and redirect it into building your life. You start working on your dreams without delay. You start improving your habits without worrying about who approves. You start healing without seeking validation. You stop living in the imaginary scenarios inside your head and instead take real action in the real world. Your life begins to move forward at a pace that feels natural and powerful because you are no longer wasting emotional fuel on unnecessary conversations. Another profound transformation occurs. Your sense of identity becomes stable. When you constantly explain yourself, your identity becomes fragile. It depends on who understands you, who supports you, who agrees with you. But when you detach from explanation, You realize that your identity does not depend on anyone else's understanding. You decide who you are. You define your worth. You claim your values. You shape your path. You choose your inner truth, even if it makes you stand alone for a while. This is the beginning of authentic selfhood. Living without explaining yourself also deepens your spiritual maturity. You realize that life does not require constant commentary. Change does not require permission. Growth does not require applause. Healing does not require a public announcement. Peace does not require an audience. Silence becomes a form of wisdom rather than a form of hiding. You begin to love your own company. You enjoy the calmness that comes from not needing to defend who you are. You find joy in keeping some parts of your life sacred, private, undisclosed. Eventually, the freedom becomes so natural that you wonder how you ever lived without it. You walk through life lighter. You speak only when necessary. You move with intention, not pressure. You feel more grounded in your decisions. You feel more connected to your inner self. You feel unbothered by noise because the world outside no longer determines the world inside. This is a level of freedom most people never reach, not because it is difficult, but because they never stop explaining long enough to realize they never needed to explain in the first place. To live without explaining yourself is not arrogance. It is self-respect. It is emotional maturity. It is spiritual strength. It is clarity. It is liberation. You do not owe the world an explanation for who you are becoming. Your life began slowing the moment you tried to justify every step. Your life begins fully the moment you stop. 10. When you stop explaining yourself, you finally become who you were meant to be. There is a silent truth most people spend their whole lives running away from. The biggest barrier to becoming your true self is not the world outside it, is the version of you that keeps explaining itself. Every time you explain your decisions, you shape your identity around the comfort of others. Every time you justify your boundaries, you dilute your own strength. Every time you defend your growth, you shrink yourself to fit the expectations of people who were never meant to walk your path. And every time you apologize for choosing peace, choosing solitude, choosing discipline, choosing self-respect, or choosing a new direction, you betray the deeper version of you that is waiting to emerge. Explaining yourself traps you inside a version of life that was designed by other people's opinions. It keeps you stuck in the role society gave you, not the role your soul was meant to play. It keeps you living a life based on what people want from you, not what life is asking from you. And because you are constantly explaining, you never give yourself permission to grow into the next version of who you really are. You stay in familiar environments. You stay around familiar expectations. You stay attached to familiar identities. You stay trapped in familiar fears. And you end up wondering why you feel lost, emotionally tired, spiritually empty, or disconnected from your own purpose. Buddhist teachings highlight a profound truth. You cannot awaken to your full self while you are still performing for the world. The self you explain is not the self you truly are. The self you defend is not the self you truly are. The self you modify so others feel comfortable is not the self you truly are. The real you exists underneath all the stories you tell people just to avoid judgment. When you stop explaining, the layers begin to fall away. Everything fake dissolves. Everything forced softens. Everything borrowed returns to where it came from. The real you slowly rises. To stop explaining yourself is an act of spiritual courage. It means you are willing to let go of the old identity that was created from approval, validation, and fear. It means you are ready to step into a new identity built from clarity, self-respect, and inner wisdom. This transition is not always easy, because the moment you stop explaining yourself, you stop giving people power over your choices. People who were used to controlling you will resist. People who relied on your sensitivity will feel insecure. People who depended on your softness will feel threatened. People who enjoyed your lack of boundaries will feel uncomfortable. And people who never respected your path will suddenly question why you no longer care about their opinions. But their discomfort is not your problem. It is simply the byproduct of you returning to your truth. When you stop explaining yourself, you begin to rediscover your identity in a purer form. You realize that your personality was shaped far more by society than by your authentic nature. You see that you have been carrying emotional weight that was never yours. You recognize that most of your fears came from other people's expectations, not your own intuition. You understand that your life was filled with unnecessary obligations that drained your peace, but never nourished your soul. All of this becomes visible only when silence replaces explanation. Only in silence do you hear your true voice. You begin to make decisions based on what feels aligned, not what feels approved. You begin to look at your relationships through a different lens, no longer focusing on who understands you, but on who respects your boundaries. You begin to walk away from environments that suffocate your growth. You begin to take risks you once avoided. You start speaking less but living more intentionally. And most importantly, you begin to trust your inner wisdom in a way you never did before, because now your decisions are no longer filtered through the fear of being misunderstood. Stopping the habit of explaining yourself does something extraordinary to your confidence. It gives you a deeper sense of inner authority. You feel grounded. You feel certain. You feel more connected to your intuition. You stop needing reassurance. You stop seeking permission. You stop looking outward for answers you've always had inside. This inner authority becomes your new foundation. You start thinking for yourself. You start choosing for yourself. You start moving for yourself. And as this inner authority grows, your emotional world stabilizes. Your mental storms become less overwhelming. Your inner dialogue becomes kinder and stronger. Your self-esteem becomes unshakable. This shift affects every part of your life. In your relationships, you stop tolerating disrespect, inconsistency, and emotional manipulation. You stop giving long explanations for why you're not okay with certain behaviors. You stop accepting apologies that come without change. You stop staying silent about things that hurt your peace. Instead, you become someone whose boundaries speak louder than your explanations ever did. People begin to notice this. Some will admire your strength. Some will feel inspired. Some will be intimidated. Some will disappear because your strength exposes their weakness. But all of this is necessary. Your circle shrinks, but it becomes clean. It becomes aligned. It becomes peaceful. In your work and ambitions, you also become unstoppable. The energy you once wasted explaining yourself becomes fuel for progress. You move quietly, intentionally, and powerfully, because you are no longer distracted by who approves and who doesn't. You no longer sabotage yourself with overthinking. You no longer fear failure, because failure feels natural when your life is no longer under public evaluation. You begin to explore your potential in ways you never allowed before. You step into projects, paths, and possibilities that once felt too risky, because now you are no longer living for the world's approval. You are living for your own evolution. On a spiritual level, living without explanation creates a profound sense of inner peace. You feel lighter because there is nothing left to defend. You feel calmer because you are no longer trying to control everything around you. You feel more connected to the present moment because your mind is not constantly replaying conversations or anticipating misunderstandings. You feel more aligned because you are living from your inner truth rather than outer expectations. This kind of peace becomes your natural state. It becomes your home, and once you experience this peace, you protect it with your life. One of the deepest transformations that occur when you stop explaining yourself is that you begin to accept yourself fully, not the polished version, not the filtered version, not the socially acceptable version, but the raw, honest, unedited version of you, the version that feels deeply, thinks differently, moves uniquely, and grows endlessly. You accept your flaws, your wounds, your strengths, your shadows, your past, your discomfort, your beauty, your potential. You stop hiding parts of yourself. You stop apologizing for your existence. You stop dimming your light to avoid standing out. You stop shrinking your vision to avoid intimidating others. You stop silencing your voice because it makes someone feel insecure. You become whole. And finally, the most powerful thing happens. Life begins to open up for you in ways you never imagined. When you stop explaining yourself, the universe responds differently. Your energy becomes cleaner. Your path becomes clearer. Opportunities start aligning with your courage, not your fear. People enter your life who resonate with your authenticity, not your performance. You begin attracting experiences that match your inner truth. Life begins to feel less like a battle and more like a journey of self-discovery, a journey of alignment, a journey of becoming. When you stop explaining yourself, you do not lose anything, you gain everything. You gain clarity, you gain confidence, you gain peace, you gain purpose. You gain your real identity. You gain the freedom to grow without fear. You gain the power to live without apology. You gain the inner strength to stand alone if necessary. You gain the wisdom to choose what nourishes your soul. You gain the courage to transform your life without needing applause. Your real life, the life meant for you, the life aligned with your higher self, the life designed by your spirit, begins the moment you stop explaining. That is the doorway. That is the awakening. That is the shift. And once you step through, the world will never have the same power over you again. 11. You reclaim your inner power the moment you stop explaining your pain, your boundaries, and your healing. There is a certain kind of strength that is not loud, not aggressive, not dramatic, and not attention-seeking. It is not the strength that shouts, argues, or demands to be seen. It is a quiet strength, a strength that is born in silence, a strength that emerges the moment you stop explaining the deepest parts of yourself, your pain, your boundaries, your healing, your changes, and the path you choose to walk. When you stop explaining these things, you take back a power that you didn't even realize you had given away. You reclaim the authority over your own story. For most of your life, you were taught to justify everything. You explained why you were hurt. You explained why certain people's behavior affected you. You explained why something broke you mentally or emotionally. You explained why you needed space, why you distanced yourself, why you changed your priorities, why you couldn't pretend to be okay anymore. You explained your trauma as if people had the right to demand an explanation for your suffering. You explained your boundaries as if they needed approval from the people who were violating them. You explained your healing as if your transformation required the permission of those who contributed to your pain. But the truth is simple. Your pain is not something you owe anyone. Your boundaries are not something you negotiate. Your healing is not something you justify. Your growth is not something that requires permission. These are sacred parts of your existence, and they belong only to you. Yet most people never realize this because they are conditioned to explain themselves so deeply that their entire emotional life becomes dependent on how others react. Explaining your pain does not heal it. Explaining your boundaries does not strengthen them. Explaining your healing does not accelerate it. What explanation does is drain you. It takes away the spiritual energy your growth requires. It opens your inner wounds to people who may not handle them with care. It places your emotional world into the hands of people who do not know what to do with it. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the deepest healing happens in silence. When you stop explaining your suffering, your heart finally has room to breathe. When you stop justifying your emotional needs, your mind becomes clearer. When you stop defending your boundaries, they become stronger. When you stop trying to convince people why you had to walk away, the burden you were carrying suddenly disappears. You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were lost through years of over-explaining. When you explain your pain, you hand your emotional power to the person who listens. You give them the authority to decide whether your pain is valid. You give them the power to minimize it, to misinterpret it, to use it against you, or to compare it with their own experiences. Some people will understand, but many will not. And every time they don't, you feel smaller. You feel unheard. You feel invalidated. You feel like you have to repeat yourself, justify yourself, defend yourself again and again. This cycle weakens your emotional foundation, creating a dependency on being understood in order to feel okay. But healing does not come from being understood. Healing comes from understanding yourself. When you stop explaining, you break this dependency. You reclaim ownership of your emotions. You begin to trust your own experience instead of waiting for someone else to validate it. You begin to understand that your feelings are real, even if they are misunderstood. Your boundaries are real, even if they are questioned. Your healing is real, even if no one sees it. You also begin to realize something important. People who truly care do not need long explanations. They don't need you to justify why something hurt you. They don't need you to defend why you needed distance. They don't demand reasons for why you changed. Real people simply listen. They respect your boundaries without interrogation. They understand your silence. They support your healing without needing to know every detail. The wrong people, on the other hand, will always ask for explanations not because they care, but because they want control. They want access to your inner world so they can shape it according to their comfort. They want to know your boundaries so they can test them. They want to know your pain so they can use it. They want to know your healing so they can judge it. When you stop explaining yourself, these people lose their power. They cannot manipulate what they do not understand. They cannot criticize what they cannot see. They cannot control what you do not reveal. You become unreachable, untouchable, emotionally sovereign. This does not mean you build walls. It means you build gates. You choose who enters. You choose who receives access. You choose who deserves to understand your inner world. You stop giving your emotional truth to people who cannot carry it. Another profound transformation happens. Your healing becomes cleaner. When you stop explaining your healing journey, you stop being influenced by the opinions, advice, or judgments of others. You stop being pulled in multiple emotional directions. Instead, your healing becomes slow, peaceful, and sacred. You begin to understand that healing is not a performance. It is not a story you tell for sympathy. It is not a narrative you publicize to prove something. It is a personal evolution that takes place in silence, in solitude, and in the depth of your own being. You stop worrying about how your healing looks from the outside and start focusing on how it feels on the inside. Boundaries, too, transform. When you stop explaining them, they finally have power. A boundary explained is a boundary negotiated. A boundary defended is a boundary weakened. But a boundary stated without explanation is a boundary respected. When you say, "I will not tolerate this," without explaining why, your energy becomes firm. When you say, "This is not acceptable to me," without giving a long emotional story, you send a message of strength. When you say, "I need space," without justifying your reasons, you reclaim the authority over your peace. Boundary without explanation is self-respect in its purest form. This attitude also changes your relationship with your past. You stop explaining why you stayed for too long. You stop explaining why you tolerated certain behaviors. You stop explaining why you were quiet, why you broke down, why you forgave, why you tried again, why you finally walked away. You stop explaining your survival mechanisms. You stop explaining your scars. You stop explaining your mistakes. You begin to see your past not as something that needs explanation, but as something that shaped your strength. You stop carrying shame for the way you coped. You stop feeling guilty for the way you survived. You begin to honor your past instead of defending it. And slowly, you become someone new, someone grounded, someone disciplined, someone peaceful, someone who does not allow the world to drag them into unnecessary conversations, someone who does not perform emotional labor for people who have no intention of understanding, someone who walks with quiet confidence, not because they have all the answers, but because they no longer need to explain anything. This is the beginning of true inner power, the kind of power that does not seek permission, does not ask for approval, and does not bend itself for validation. This is the power that says, "I know my truth, and that is enough." This is the power that frees you from emotional dependency. This is the power that leads you toward your highest self. When you stop explaining yourself, your pain, your healing, your boundaries, your choices, you return to yourself. You reclaim the inner strength you once gave away. You start walking a path that is guided only by your intuition, your clarity, and your spiritual wisdom. You become aligned with your purpose. You become whole. And once you reach this level of inner power, you protect it with your life. 12. When you stop explaining yourself, you step out of the illusion and finally see life as it truly is. There is a moment in every spiritual journey when the world suddenly looks different, not because the world has changed, but because you have. The noise that once controlled your emotions becomes quieter. The opinions that once shaped your decisions lose their power. The judgments that once hurt you feel distant and irrelevant. The expectations that once suffocated you fade into the background, and you begin to notice something profound. The world you were trying so hard to explain yourself to was never the real world. It was an illusion created by your own mind, shaped by old wounds, shaped by fear, shaped by insecurity, shaped by the desire to be accepted. When you stop explaining yourself, that illusion breaks, the fog lifts, the mask falls, the world becomes clearer, people's intentions become easier to read, your own needs become easier to understand, your direction becomes easier to follow. You finally see life without the filter of needing approval, and this clarity is one of the most powerful spiritual awakenings a human being can experience. To understand this transformation, you must first understand the illusion itself. Most people live inside an invisible cage built from three things: fear, expectation, and misunderstanding. You fear being disliked, so you explain yourself. You fear being judged, so you justify your decisions. You fear losing people, so you soften your truth. You fear conflict, so you adjust your boundaries. And slowly, without noticing, you build a version of yourself that is shaped entirely by the reactions of other people, not by your own inner truth. Explaining yourself becomes a habit, a reflex, a survival strategy. You explain why you're quiet, why you're distant, why you're healing, why you're no longer interested in drama, why you're walking away, why you're changing, why you're tired, why you're protecting your peace. You explain your pain, you explain your intuition, you explain your choices, you explain your values. And the more you explain, the more tangled you become in the illusion, because now your identity depends on how others interpret you. This is the deepest form of self-betrayal, living as a reflection instead of living as yourself. Buddhism teaches that true clarity comes only when the mind stops creating stories. When you stop explaining yourself, the stories you have been telling begin to dissolve. The mind becomes empty, not empty in a negative sense, but empty in a peaceful, liberated sense. Empty enough for truth to enter, empty enough for clarity to rise, empty enough for wisdom to guide you. This emptiness is not a loss, it is a return to your natural state of awareness. When the illusion breaks, you begin to see people for who they truly are. You realize that people who constantly demand explanations are usually the ones who misunderstand life the most. They operate from fear, they operate from insecurity, they operate from ego, they operate from a place of emotional immaturity where everything must be explained, defended, or justified. These people will never understand your silence because they have never sat with their own. They fear silence because silence reveals truth. They fear boundaries because boundaries expose their behavior. They fear inner peace because inner peace shows them how far they are from their own healing. But you also begin to see the ones who do understand your silence, not because you explained it, but because they feel it. These are the people who have walked the spiritual path long enough to recognize the signs of a soul returning to itself. These are the people who respect your boundaries without needing reasons. These are the people who trust your direction without questioning your path. These are the people who can sit with you in silence and still feel connected. These people do not pull you back into the illusion, they walk with you out of it. Another layer of clarity emerges. You begin to understand how much of your suffering came from seeking understanding. You realize that half of the emotional pain you carried was caused by waiting for people to get it. You wanted them to understand your struggle. You wanted them to understand your sensitivity. You wanted them to understand why certain things hurt you. You wanted them to understand your dreams, your decisions, your priorities. But the painful truth is that most people do not want to understand you. They want you to fit their expectations. They want you to remain predictable. They want you to stay the version of you that they are comfortable with. They want you to keep explaining because explanation gives them access, and access gives them control. When you stop explaining, you break this pattern. You take back control. You reclaim emotional territory that was once occupied by other people's expectations. Suddenly, your energy stops leaking into conversations that drain you. Suddenly, your mind stops replaying arguments that should have ended long ago. Suddenly, your heart stops carrying guilt that was never yours. Suddenly, you begin to live with an internal steadiness that nothing on the outside can disturb. The more you sit in this clarity, the more the illusion fades. You realize that not every opinion deserves your response. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every judgment deserves defense. Not every person deserves access to your inner world. You understand that life becomes easier the moment you stop being available to every conversation that seeks to pull you backward. You learn to let people misunderstand you without feeling the need to fix it. You learn to let them draw their own conclusions while you silently continue your journey. This is not arrogance, this is wisdom. This is the understanding that people will see you according to their level of awareness, not according to your truth. Explaining cannot change their level. Explaining cannot raise their consciousness. Explaining cannot make them see what they are not ready to see. You finally understand that clarity is not something you give others. It is something you cultivate within yourself. The more you stop explaining, the more you begin to see your life with fresh eyes. You notice what truly matters: your peace, your purpose, your values, your spiritual alignment. You stop living in reaction to the world and start living in response to your inner guidance. Your direction becomes sharper. Your decisions become cleaner. Your pace becomes calmer. You begin to live intentionally instead of emotionally. You begin to grow without noise. And then something extraordinary happens. You awaken to yourself. Not the self that was created from trauma. Not the self that was shaped by society. Not the self that learned to explain everything. But the deeper self, the self that was always beneath the surface. The self that knows exactly who you are. The self that knows exactly where you are meant to go. The self that does not fear being misunderstood. The self that does not chase validation. The self that does not depend on approval. The self that is truly free. This awakening is the ultimate reward of silence. It is the moment you step out of the illusion and into reality. And in this reality, your life begins to feel different, lighter, clearer, calmer, deeper, and more meaningful. You make choices that reflect your truth. You walk paths that honor your soul. You distance yourself from anything that disturbs your inner peace. You stop forcing what does not align. You stop holding on to what hurts. You stop returning to what broke you. You stop apologizing for who you are becoming. You finally see life as it is, and more importantly, you finally see yourself as you are. This is the transformation that only silence can bring. This is the clarity that only self-trust can unlock. This is the awakening that only comes when you stop explaining your existence to people who cannot understand it. When the illusion breaks, You don't just change, you evolve. You expand, you awaken. And once you awaken, you can never go back. 13. You finally become untouchable. When you stop explaining who you are and start living in alignment with your truth, there comes a point in every person's spiritual evolution when they realize that explaining themselves is not only unnecessary, it is harmful. It weakens the spirit. It drains the mind. It confuses the heart. It chains you to the expectations of people who were never meant to guide your life in the first place. And the moment you understand this, you begin to shift from a life of reaction to a life of alignment. You stop explaining who you are, what you want, what you feel, what you dream, what you believe, and what path you choose to follow. You no longer give the world permission to interpret your existence. You reclaim your identity from the hands of others and place it back where it belongs within yourself. Most people live their entire lives being emotionally controlled by opinions. They feel pressured to justify their choices, their boundaries, their quietness, their healing, their ambitions, their solitude, their changes. They treat their identity as if it were a fragile artifact that must be protected with explanations. They spend years, even decades, trying to correct misunderstandings, trying to prove their worth, trying to appear reasonable, trying to avoid criticism. And in doing so, they lose the most valuable thing a human being can possess: alignment with their own truth. They become easy to manipulate, easy to guilt, easy to pressure, easy to control because they respond to every opinion that challenges their sense of self. But the moment you stop explaining who you are, something extraordinary happens. A door opens inside your consciousness, and you step into a version of yourself that is unshakable, untouchable, unbothered. You begin to live in a pure state of alignment, where your actions match your values, your decisions match your intuition, your emotions match your wisdom, and your life matches your truth. You no longer bend, shrink, or distort yourself to make others comfortable. You no longer respond to every comment. You no longer react to every misunderstanding. You no longer defend your identity like a fragile secret. You realize something life-changing. People who understand you don't need explanations, and people who misunderstand you won't believe explanations anyway. This realization brings a deep, peaceful power into your life. You begin to operate from a place of inner certainty. Your energy becomes firm but calm. Your mind becomes still but focused. Your heart becomes open but protected. Your spirit becomes humble but powerful. You stop trying to be everything for everyone and start becoming everything you were meant to be for yourself. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop proving. You simply exist in the fullness of who you are, without apology, without justification, without needing to be validated. Buddhist teachings emphasize the importance of alignment with nature, alignment with truth, alignment with your authentic self. To be aligned means your inner and outer worlds match. To be aligned means your actions reflect your inner wisdom. To be aligned means you are no longer divided between who you are and who the world wants you to be. Explaining yourself breaks alignment. It pulls you out of your center. It forces you into a duality between your truth and their expectations. But when you stop explaining, alignment becomes natural. You live from your inner center, not from the shifting expectations of others. This internal alignment begins to change your emotional world. You stop being hurt by comments that once destroyed you. You stop being triggered by judgments that once haunted you. You stop feeling the need to convince people who never cared. You stop feeling guilty for choosing yourself. You stop feeling obligated to maintain relationships and situations that drain your soul. Suddenly, the emotional storms that once felt unbearable become small waves you can watch without drowning. You develop a kind of emotional immunity, not coldness, not detachment, but wisdom. You know what deserves your attention and what does not. You know what deserves your energy and what does not. You know what deserves your heart and what does not. When you stop explaining yourself, your boundaries become stronger without ever being announced. You no longer say, "I'm sorry, I can't do this because." You simply don't do it. You no longer say, "I need space because." You simply take your space. You no longer say, "I don't feel comfortable with this because." You simply step away. People notice this. Some admire it, some fear it, some resent it, but everyone respects it, because silence combined with alignment becomes a form of spiritual authority. You no longer have to raise your voice. You no longer have to argue. You no longer have to justify. People feel your boundaries. They sense your strength. They recognize your presence. This transformation affects your relationships in profound ways. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop attracting people who require explanations in order to treat you well. You stop maintaining friendships that drain you. You stop giving emotional access to people who misunderstand you. You stop giving second chances to people who cannot respect your path. Instead, you attract people who resonate with your energy, people who see you without needing to be told, people who respect you without demanding reasons, people who walk with you without forcing you to perform. Your relationships become lighter, deeper, and more real because they are built on understanding, not explanation. Your ambitions also transform. You stop holding back. You stop making decisions based on how others might react. You stop delaying your dreams because you fear criticism. You stop explaining why you want something. You stop seeking approval before starting something new. You take quiet, intentional action. You move with confidence instead of hesitation. You choose paths based on alignment, not validation. And the more aligned your actions become, the more doors life begins to open for you. You begin to see that your destiny was always waiting for you. It was you who was delaying it with explanations. On a deeper spiritual level, you become untouchable. Not because nothing can disturb your life, but because nothing can disturb your inner world. You feel a constant sense of clarity, a constant sense of purpose, a constant sense of connection to something greater than yourself. You realize that your mission in life is not to be understood, it is to be authentic, it is to evolve, it is to grow, it is to awaken, it is to understand yourself, not to be understood by others. You begin to feel guided, even when your path is difficult. You begin to feel protected, even when life becomes uncertain. You begin to feel inspired, even when nothing external is supporting you. This is what happens when you stop explaining who you are. You finally meet yourself. You meet the version of you that was buried under years of pressure, guilt, fear, and expectations. You meet the version of you that is powerful enough to walk alone. You meet the version of you that honors peace more than approval. You meet the version of you that chooses growth over comfort. You meet the version of you that trusts silence more than validation. You meet the version of you that is guided by truth, not opinions. And once you meet this version of yourself, you never want to be anyone else again. The world might still misunderstand you. Some people might still judge you. Some might still misinterpret your silence. Some might still question your choices. But none of it matters, because their stories no longer define you. Their misunderstandings no longer disturb you. Their opinions no longer shape you. Their expectations no longer guide you. You stand so firmly in your truth that the noise outside cannot reach you anymore. This is freedom, the highest, deepest, most sacred form of freedom. To be yourself without explanation. To be aligned without apology. To be silent without fear. To be powerful without performance. To be you without needing permission. When you reach this state, you become impossible to manipulate, impossible to guilt, impossible to pressure, impossible to break. You become untouchable, not because you are hard, but because you are whole. 14. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you break generational cycles and rewrite your entire destiny. There is a truth very few people ever realize. Explaining yourself is not just a habit, it is a generational pattern. It is a silent, inherited burden passed down through families, cultures, environments, and emotional wounds. Your parents explained themselves because they feared judgment. Their parents explained themselves because they feared shame. Generations before them explained themselves because survival required obedience, conformity, and silence. And somewhere along the line, you inherited this reflex, the instinct to over-explain, over-justify, over-defend, over-apologize. The instinct to make yourself small so others feel comfortable. The instinct to suppress your truth to avoid conflict. The instinct to soften your voice to avoid being misunderstood. But every generational cycle has a breaking point, a moment when someone in the family line becomes conscious enough, awake enough, self-aware enough to realize that this inherited behavior is not truth, it is conditioning. And the moment that person stops explaining themselves, they don't just change their own life. They break a cycle that has lasted for decades, sometimes centuries. They rewrite the emotional DNA of their lineage. They shift the future of everyone who comes after them. This is how powerful your decision becomes when you stop giving the world explanations it does not deserve. Most people don't realize how deeply they were shaped by their upbringing. You were raised to behave in ways that made others comfortable. You were taught to be polite, even when people hurt you. You were told to stay silent, even when your boundaries were violated. You were told to understand people who never tried to understand you. You were told to carry emotional responsibility that did not belong to you. You were told to justify your feelings, explain your intentions, and defend your dreams. You were told to seek approval, even when it meant betraying yourself. And because this pattern was normalized, you believed that explaining yourself was the right thing to do, even when it exhausted your spirit. Stopping this pattern requires an inner awakening, a realization that the life you were trained to live is not the life you are meant to live, a realization that explaining yourself is not a sign of kindness, but a sign of inherited fear, a realization that you were programmed to doubt your own intuition, minimize your emotions, and over-respect the opinions of others. A realization that these patterns were never you, they were simply passed down to you. And the moment you become aware of this, you have a choice. You either continue the cycle or you break it. When you choose to stop explaining yourself, you are not just rejecting unnecessary conversations, you are rejecting an entire emotional system that controlled you. You are rejecting the belief that others must approve your path. You are rejecting the idea that someone else's comfort matters more than your own well-being. You are rejecting the reflex to justify your boundaries. You are rejecting the expectation that your identity must fit into the limits defined by your culture, family, or environment. You are rejecting the generational silence that told you to ignore your inner voice. This kind of rejection is not rebellion, it is liberation. And with liberation comes transformation. Once you stop explaining yourself, you begin to see the generational patterns clearly. You see how many people in your family lived lives shaped by fear. You see how many dreams were never pursued because someone feared what the village would say. You see how many opportunities were lost because someone cared more about external judgment than internal calling. You see how much trauma was reinforced because no one raised their voice to say, "This ends with me." And suddenly, you realize that by refusing to live in that pattern, you are not just healing yourself, you are healing the entire lineage. This awareness brings a new sense of responsibility. Not the heavy, guilt-based responsibility you grew up with, but a higher responsibility, a spiritual responsibility. The responsibility to choose truth over fear, the responsibility to choose alignment over approval, the responsibility to choose authenticity over conformity, the responsibility to choose healing over repeating patterns, the responsibility to choose self-respect over generational expectations. And when you embrace this responsibility, your identity becomes firm, your decisions become intentional, your voice becomes steady, your presence becomes powerful. The people around you will sense the shift. Some will admire your courage because they always wished they could do what you are doing. Some will resist your transformation because your growth exposes their stagnation. Some will misunderstand your silence because they cannot imagine a life not shaped by explanations. Some will distance themselves because they cannot handle the version of you that no longer bends to their expectations. And some will try to pressure you back into the cycle, not because you are wrong, but because your liberation reminds them of their own emotional imprisonment. But you remain unmoved, because once you stop explaining yourself, you become anchored. You no longer chase validation that was denied to generations before you. You no longer accept emotional assignments that belong to others. You no longer sacrifice your mental health to maintain peace that only benefited those who took advantage of your silence. You no longer live out the emotional stories written by people who were afraid to live their own truth. Instead, you write a new script. In this new script, you value yourself enough not to justify your existence. You speak your truth even when your voice shakes. You protect your peace even if it means standing alone. You stop shrinking yourself to fit the limitations of your family's history. You take steps your parents were too afraid to take. You break norms your grandparents were too conditioned to question. You set boundaries that your ancestors never knew they were allowed to have. You become the first in your lineage to say, "I am not explaining myself anymore. I choose myself." This is where your destiny begins to change. The moment you stop explaining yourself, life begins to reorganize around your truth. Old patterns fall away. Old connections dissolve. Old behaviors lose their hold. Old beliefs melt into nothingness. You begin to live with a level of clarity that previous generations never experienced. You begin to attract opportunities aligned with who you truly are, rather than who you were trained to be. You begin to create a life built not on fear or pressure, but on authenticity and intention. This internal shift also affects the next generation. Children raised by someone who does not over-explain themselves learn to trust their own voices. They learn to honor their boundaries. They learn that they do not need permission to exist. They learn that their feelings are valid, even when misunderstood. They learn that approval is not a requirement for peace. They learn that authenticity is not a risk, it is a gift. They inherit a different emotional world because you chose to break the old one. Your healing becomes their foundation. Your boundaries become their inheritance. Your clarity becomes their emotional blueprint. Your courage becomes their possibility. This is how generational cycles are broken, not through conflict, but through consciousness. Not through rebellion, but through awakening. Not through arguing, but through refusal to explain yourself anymore. When you reach this level of emotional maturity, you become untouchable, not because nothing can influence you, but because nothing can control you. You see life without distortion. You understand people without taking their behavior personally. You navigate the world without fear of misunderstanding. You carry yourself with a kind of calm strength that cannot be taught, only earned. And this is the ultimate reward of stopping explanations. You become the author of your own destiny. You don't follow the paths inherited from generations before you, you create new ones. You don't repeat the emotional patterns you were taught, you break them. You don't become a reflection of the past, you become a seed for the future. You don't live the life expected of you, you live the life meant for you. And all of this begins the moment you stop explaining. 15. Life finally becomes peaceful when you stop explaining your priorities and start living according to your true values. One of the most exhausting battles a person can fight is the battle of trying to justify their priorities to people who do not share their values, their level of awareness, or their stage of growth. For most of your life, you were conditioned to believe that you must constantly explain why you choose what you choose, why you value your peace, why you value your mental health, why you value your boundaries, why you value solitude, why you value growth, why you value discipline, why you value silence, why you value emotional distance from unhealthy people, why you value spiritual evolution over social approval. And because of this conditioning, you grew up believing that your priorities needed to make sense to others before they could make sense to you. But priorities do not need permission. Values do not need validation. Your life does not need to be understood for it to be meaningful. The moment you stop explaining your priorities, you reclaim the deepest form of freedom, the freedom to live in alignment with your truth rather than in reaction to other people's expectations. And this is the moment life becomes peaceful, not because the world changes, but because you stop negotiating your inner world with people who do not live there. Consider this truth. Every person's priorities are shaped by their experiences, their wounds, their healing journey, their inner desires, and their spiritual path. No two people see life the same way. What is essential to you may not matter at all to someone else. What nourishes your soul may annoy or confuse someone whose soul is still struggling. What brings you peace may be uncomfortable for someone who is addicted to chaos. What you value may look unnecessary to someone who has never experienced true peace. Explaining your priorities to such people is like trying to describe the ocean to someone who has only ever seen a cup of water. They can only understand from their level of experience, not yours. And when they don't understand, they criticize, they question, they judge, they make you doubt yourself, They make you feel guilty for choosing what aligns with your peace. They try to pull you back into the old patterns you've outgrown, not because you're wrong, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. But the moment you stop explaining your priorities, you remove their influence over your life. You stop negotiating your inner truth with outer noise. You stop shrinking your values so others feel comfortable. You stop allowing misunderstandings to determine your direction. You stop giving access to people who have not earned the right to understand your heart. And when that happens, life shifts. It softens. It becomes calm. You begin to realize that your priorities were never supposed to be explained. They were supposed to be lived. You stop explaining why you choose peace over chaos, because only someone who has survived emotional storms understands the value of calm. You stop explaining why you choose solitude, because only someone who has healed their loneliness understands the power of being alone without feeling empty. You stop explaining why you distance yourself from certain people, because only someone who has cut ties with toxic energy understands the necessity of protecting the soul. You stop explaining why you invest in your mind, your body, your spirit, because only someone who has healed the neglect of their inner world understands why self-care is survival, not luxury. You stop explaining why you choose a quieter life, because only someone who has lived through noise understands that silence is not emptiness, it is clarity. You stop explaining why you don't tolerate disrespect, because only someone who knows their worth understands that boundaries are not walls, they are doors through which only the right energy can enter. You stop explaining why you no longer participate in drama or meaningless conversations, because only someone who has tasted inner stillness understands how harmful noise can be to a healing mind. You stop explaining why you slow down, why you disconnect, why you breathe, why you think differently, because only someone who has awakened to their spiritual path understands that true progress sometimes happens in stillness, not movement. This shift is not small. It is a spiritual revolution. It is the moment your life becomes yours again. When you stop explaining your priorities, the guilt that once followed you disappears. The pressure that once suffocated you fades. The confusion that once clouded your decisions dissolves. The emotional fog lifts. Your mind becomes clean. Your heart becomes light. Your soul becomes centered. This is the beginning of inner peace, not the temporary peace that depends on silence from the outside world, but the deeper peace that comes from silence inside yourself. A peace that is not influenced by people's opinions. A peace that does not break when someone misunderstands you. A peace that does not vanish when someone questions your decisions. A peace that remains steady because it is rooted in values, not in validation. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment, and one of the strongest attachments in modern life is the attachment to being understood. When you explain yourself, you are attached to other people's approval of your path. When you stop explaining, you detach. You let go. You accept. You understand that people will only understand you as deeply as they understand themselves, and in this acceptance, peace enters your life. Another powerful transformation happens. When you stop explaining your priorities, your values become stronger. They solidify. They become the foundation upon which your life is built. You no longer make decisions based on fear or pressure. You make them based on what feels right at the soul level. Your values guide you, not guilt, not fear, not insecurity, not external expectations. Your life becomes intentional. Every choice becomes clear. Every step becomes aligned. Every boundary becomes respected. Every change becomes meaningful. And then something extraordinary happens. The right people begin to enter your life. The people who appreciate your values without needing explanations. The people who respect your priorities because they have their own. The people who understand your silence because they have learned to listen to their own. The people who walk with you, not because they want you to explain your path, but because they honor your journey. These are the people you were meant to meet. These are the connections you were meant to build. These are the relationships that last. These are the souls that align with your inner truth. When such people arrive, explanations disappear naturally. You do not need to justify your boundaries to someone who has their own. You do not need to explain your healing to someone who is healing too. You do not need to explain your silence to someone who knows its power. You do not need to explain your priorities to someone whose life is also guided by clarity. This is the beautiful irony of life. When you stop explaining your priorities, you finally attract the people who genuinely understand them. You also stop attracting those who drain you. When you stop explaining, you become energetically unavailable to people who thrive on confusion. You become invisible to drama. You become uninteresting to manipulators. You become unreachable to those who depend on your emotional weakness to feel powerful. Your silence becomes a filter that removes anyone who is not aligned with your values. This is where life becomes peaceful beyond anything you ever imagined. No more internal conflict. No more emotional exhaustion. No more guilt for choosing yourself. No more confusion about what you want. No more seeking approval that never comes. No more explaining who you are to people who cannot see you. Your life becomes simple in the most powerful way. You wake up knowing your values. You make decisions based on your priorities. You act without hesitation. You rest without guilt. You grow without needing applause. You align without needing explanation. This is true freedom. This is true peace. This is true alignment. And it all begins the moment you say, I no longer explain my priorities. I live them. There comes a moment in every person's journey when they look back and realize that almost everything that exhausted them, everything that confused them, everything that broke them mentally, everything that drained their spirit, and everything that stole their peace had one common root: the habit of explaining themselves, explaining their pain, explaining their boundaries, explaining their choices, explaining their silence, explaining their healing, explaining their worth, explaining their dreams, explaining their truth. And when you see the truth clearly, it hits you with such force that you wonder how you lived for so long carrying such an unnecessary burden. Life changes the moment you put that burden down. Your real life does not begin when the world finally understands you, because most of the world never will. Your real life begins when you stop needing them to understand. When you stop explaining yourself, you step into a version of life that is cleaner, quieter, sharper, stronger, clearer, and far more authentic. You begin to live from your inner world instead of constantly reacting to the outer world. You begin to trust your intuition instead of doubting yourself because someone questions you. You begin to honor your feelings instead of dismissing them because someone else does not take them seriously. You begin to follow your path instead of letting people who have never walked it tell you where you should go. This shift is not small, it is a rebirth. You stop being controlled by opinions. You stop being shaped by misunderstandings. You stop being manipulated by guilt. You stop being drained by people who never respected your boundaries. You stop being triggered by judgments that once haunted you. You stop living in fear of losing people who were never aligned with your growth. You stop shrinking yourself so others feel comfortable. You stop diluting your truth so others don't feel threatened. You stop dimming your inner light so insecure people don't feel overshadowed. Instead, you rise. You rise into a self that feels whole for the first time, a self that knows its worth, a self that stands firm without aggression, a self that speaks truth without apology, a self that moves with purpose, not hesitation, a self that grows without explaining why, a self that walks away without giving a speech, a self that chooses silence because silence is now a language of peace, not fear, a self that no longer bends to be understood because understanding is no longer something you chase. This is the moment you become untouchable, not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can control you. The world outside continues to move, but the world inside you becomes unshakable. The storms of other people's emotions no longer pull you into chaos. The winds of criticism no longer blow you off your path. The waves of misunderstanding no longer drown your self-worth. Your inner foundation becomes so strong that life can send anything your way, and you remain still, not frozen still, grounded, centered, aware, conscious, peaceful. This is what happens when you stop explaining yourself. You regain sovereignty over your mind, your heart, your time, your energy, and your destiny. And with this sovereignty comes clarity. You begin to see people as they truly are. You recognize who deserves your presence and who was benefiting from your confusion. You notice who respects your boundaries and who only tolerated you as long as you had none. You see who grows with you and who grows threatened by your evolution. You see who values your peace and who drains it. You see who meets you with honesty and who manipulates through guilt. You see who listens and who merely waits for their turn to speak. You see who deserves to walk beside you and who deserves to fade out of your life. The beauty of this clarity is that it requires no anger, no arguments, no explanations. The people who are meant for you gravitate toward your truth. The people who are not meant for you fall away from it. Both movements happen naturally, effortlessly, without emotional struggle. This is the natural flow of life once you stop explaining yourself. Everything false quietly exits. Everything real quietly remains. And something even more powerful happens. You begin to meet yourself, the real you. The you that existed before the world told you who to be. The you that was buried under expectations. The you that was silenced by guilt. The you that was weakened by overthinking. The you that was exhausted by explaining. The you that was suffocated by emotional responsibilities that were never yours. When you stop explaining yourself, that suppressed, silent, forgotten version of you rises to the surface. And with that rising comes a deep sense of coming home to your truth, home to your inner strength, home to your values, home to your spirit. Your life becomes simple in the most powerful way. You prioritize what matters. You release what doesn't. You walk away from what breaks you. You choose what grows you. You protect what nourishes you. You follow what aligns with your peace. You refuse what disturbs your soul. And for the first time, you stop apologizing for any of it. Because you finally understand, a life lived in constant explanation is not a life, it is a performance. And you were not born to perform. You were born to live, to breathe, to grow, to evolve, to awaken, to discover, to experience, to be. You were born to walk your path without needing the world's approval. You were born to become the truest version of yourself, not the version that keeps everyone else comfortable. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you become free. Free from attachment, free from guilt, free from pressure, free from emotional noise. Free from the expectations that once shaped your entire identity. Free from the stories others wrote about you. Free from the misunderstandings that once controlled you. This freedom is not loud. It does not shout. It does not demand attention. It is quiet, calm, centered, deliberate. It is the freedom that sits in your chest like a soft, warm truth that cannot be shaken. It is the freedom that whispers, "You are enough as you are." It is the freedom that reminds you that life does not require explanations. It requires authenticity. It requires courage. It requires trust. It requires clarity. It requires presence. It requires alignment. Your real life, the life that is meant for you, the life that fits your soul, the life that aligns with your values, the life that honors your inner wisdom, begins when you stop explaining yourself. That is the doorway. That is the shift. That is the awakening. That is the liberation. And once you cross that threshold, once you step into the version of yourself that no longer explains, apologizes, or justifies, the world will never have the same power over you again. You will walk with a quiet confidence that cannot be touched. You will protect your peace with a strength that does not need to be proven. You will follow your path with a clarity that does not need to be defended. You will live your truth with a grace that does not need to be explained. This is your new life, the one you create, the one you choose, the one you live not for others, but for yourself. And it all begins the moment you say, "I no longer explain myself. I live my truth."